Morning, church. Today's scripture reading will be Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. That's all right. He get an applause too. That's good. That's good. Family news. Let's spend a couple of minutes maybe talking about family news. Did you guys notice that Alta Gracia is with us this morning? Awesome. Now, Alta's still going through some procedures and things for the cancer that she had, but God has blessed her with health to be here, so we're glad you're with us today, Alta. You're a real blessing to us. Unfortunately, today, the Fisks are leaving town. Larry and Rhonda are taking off. We have enjoyed their being with us for this past period. We enjoyed Larry's song leading, cooperation with the ministries, Rhonda's involvement with the ladies' ministries, the food pantry. Just both of you guys are outstanding brother and sister to us, so we're going to miss you. Anybody else have any family news you just want to shout out and say, the family needs to know this? Rices are taking off too. I would like to say all the nice things I said about Larry and Rhonda to you. And so I will. You guys are extremely valuable. We love your service to the church here, and we're going to miss you. We can't wait till it snows so much in Montana, you got to come back here. We're just really praying for a lot of snow. Okay, there you go. Any other family news? This is family news time. We're family, the family of God. Anybody else? I think the ladies had a great day yesterday. I wasn't there because I wasn't invited, but I understood. It was really, really cool. The ladies, you enjoy that? All right, good job. Yeah, way to go. I'm not going to repeat this message that we did a month or 6 weeks ago on Romans 12, but it's an introduction to the next section of Romans. You've been following along in our messages. We've been focusing on a chapter a week through Romans, except for a couple of times. Last week we took a break from that, but we're gonna go through the rest of Romans. Romans 12 begins what a lot of people call the practical section of Romans. The first 11 chapters are very theological, very based on doctrine, very based on what God has done. It's very important to lay that foundation. And in fact, the very first phrase, I appeal to you, therefore, by the mercies of God. Chapters 1 through 11 explain the mercies of God, how God has been so merciful. We are all sinners, and yet, even though Jews, Gentiles, God has been merciful to all humanity. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and yet God has extended grace. Chapter 5 says where sin abounded, because we all descended from Adam. We all did the Ancestry.com thing. We all went back to Adam. We found out we're all sinners just like Adam. We sinned just like him. We came from him. All of us came from him. And yet, the man Jesus Christ offers grace to all humankind. And so, the more that sin abounded, the more God abounded his grace. Amen for that. The mercy of God. There's no amount of sin that a person could have committed or that could commit in the future that would annul the love of God, that would cancel out God's love and grace for us. God's grace is always superior to sin. So some people would take sin lightly. So the question is raised in chapter 6. So should we just not worry about sin? Just sin? God's grace is always going to abound? No, of course not. God has not only given us victory over sin in a doctrinal way by Jesus canceling that sin on the cross. God has given us the opportunity to change our hearts. From the heart, we obey a form of doctrine that God gives us, that gives us the desire not to sin anymore. And so we actually feel God transforming our hearts, and we don't even want to serve sin. We see how sin enslaves us, and yet God gives us liberty in Christ. And so the more we serve God, the more we find ourselves at liberty to just be the people God created us to be. And so we don't desire sin. We become slaves of righteousness, if you can use slaves in that term. But it is sort of a good analogy that we were slaves of sin, but now we just become servants of righteousness. And by the grace of God, that happens. God has taken the law away so that we're not judged by law. I know on this earth, a lot of times we go to jail or we have to pay penalties or fines or whatever because we break laws. But God doesn't deal with it that way, with us that way anymore. If He did, we'd all be guilty all the time. But He deals with us on the basis of our faith and our pursuit of God by faith, and just trying to live before God by faith. And against those types of things, there is no law. Against love, there is no law. When you follow God by loving Him, and you follow loving God and loving your neighbor, there's just no law against love. In God's mind. And so the grace of God is enormous. By the mercies of God, I appeal. So this appeal from Romans chapter 12 to the end of the book, the rest of what we talk about, always remember the appeal is being made by how God has been so merciful to us. I don't remember the exact words, but there's a text, I believe at the end of chapter, I don't even remember which chapter, but Him who God has justified, He saved. And Him whom before that it even says He's predestined us, He's saved us, He's justified us, He's forgiven us. And then it says, and He even glorified us. In other words, God has already glorified us in heaven with Himself. He's looking ahead of our schedule. We haven't even died yet, and yet He's already glorified us. Because in God's mind, He's already extended that grace and mercy. He's already opened up the coffers of the inheritance of His Son, Jesus Christ, and He just shared it with the rest of Jesus' brothers and sisters, whom we are. And He's already glorified us. That's the mercy of God. God sees us with Him in eternity. He just shares life with us because of what Jesus has done. So those are the mercies of God. And the appeal that He will make, again, for the rest of the book, is based on that mercy. And so He appeals us to be a living sacrifice. When we give an offering, unfortunately, a lot of people make the mistake of saying, okay, here I have $11. Let's say I'm going to be super, super generous. I'm going to give God 5 of those 11, and these 6 are for me. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people see Christianity, is I give God His part, I keep the rest for me. That's my sacrifice to God. The rest is for me. God doesn't see it that way at all. God says this way. I want you to just give all of yourself to me. I want you to put your whole self in that little blue bag that goes around. All of you belongs to me. And another way that Jesus describes it is this way. You are stewards. There is a landowner who has his steward, and he does this in a couple of different parables, who dispenses his gifts. And these folks are stewards. They are administrators of what does not belong to them. And so really, when one becomes a Christian, or when one becomes a follower of God by Jesus and understands the mercies of God, giving your bodies as a living sacrifice means you give all $11 to God. You understand that all of that money is God's. You understand that all of your time belongs to the Lord, and you just become a manager of that. And so part of that, it needs to be used to take care of your own household. And not to be dependent on people. That's legitimate. That's what God calls you to do. Take care of your own household. The person who doesn't take care of his own household is worse than an unbeliever. That doesn't mean that money that you use to take care of your own household is not God's. That's God's. God tells you to do that. And other monies that are distributed out. And then the portion you offer in the offering that we just did out of generous hearts is offered as an offering to the saints. It's not even mentioned in the Bible that's an offering to God. It says it's an offering for the saints. Why? Because all 100% belongs to God. I can imagine a situation, and I hope it does not ever occur, but there could occur a situation that we are on the San Andreas Fault here as we hover around and move around, and a situation could occur where there is devastation and crisis, where people lose everything among us, and we really need to give sacrificially to the offering for the saints, 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And maybe we need to sell some things that otherwise we wouldn't sell. Maybe we need to cancel our vacations that otherwise we wouldn't cancel. Maybe we need to sell a vehicle and dispose of it and take that money and bring it to the elders' feet and say, here, help out the members who are in critical need. Why would we do that? We wouldn't do that if we thought, well, 10% goes to God or 8% goes to God or whatever and the rest is mine. We would only do that if we thought it's all God's, and right now He wants me to distribute it based on love and based on desire to help people out because I am a living sacrifice. And so what we're about to say here in verse 2, which is the real focus, is that all of this is based on God's mercies and our deciding to be a living sacrifice. This is your spiritual worship. And again, just to reinforce the idea, you remember when we presented this 6 or 7 weeks ago, spiritual worship, we take this out of context. Again, it's not talking about the worship service or assembly we're in right now. The word spiritual in the original language is the Greek word logikos, which means logical. What is your logical response to that kind of mercy? Your logical response is just give your whole self to God. Worship is the word latria. Latria is a word that was used for any kind of service. A domestic servant in your house would be called a latruo, or the verb would be latria in Greek, the original language. And so what is your logical service of response to a God who would give you everything, all of His mercies, and guarantee your place in heaven with Him? Your logical response to that is just give yourself to Him while you're on the planet. That's worship. That's worship. That's what your worship is. And because of that, do not be conformed to this world. Let's talk about the word conformed. The word conformed means to not be pressed into a mold. We live in a culture and live in a world that everybody wants to press you into a mold. Everybody wants you to buy their thing. Everybody wants you to buy their product. Is there anything wrong with you wanting people to buy your product or them wanting you to buy their product? Is there anything wrong with that? No, it's called what? That's capitalism. That's the world in which we all sell something, and we all buy things, we all consume, we all live in this. Now, what becomes wrong is the motive behind the reason to buy a product or right. Maybe the motive is noble, and maybe the motive is not noble. But that's what we need to be aware of. Do not be conformed to this world. Being conformed means to be pressed into something, to be pressed into a mold. We need to define another word, and that is the word world. As you know, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the Greek uses two words for the word world. We use just mainly one. The first word that the Greeks used was a different word. It was cosmos. Cosmos refers most of all to the created universe, physical world, physical universe, planet Earth, or a system of arranged things, the world. It's sometimes in the Bible when it talks about don't love the things of the world, it's talking about the system of things actually within the world in which we live. So sometimes it even has moral significance. But there's another word for world, which is this one. And this one is not cosmos. This one is, and I don't even know how to pronounce it, but it's A-E-I-O-N, so it's something like eon or aeon or something like that. And obviously you see the word eons of time. Don't be conformed to this eon. That's that word right there. It's not cosmos. Eon refers to, in Greek thought, a period of time. a unique period of time. Now, it could be a real long period of time, or it could just be a focused period of time. Don't be conformed to the period of time in which you live. I like to replace that word with the word culture. Don't be conformed to the culture in which you live. Is culture bad or is culture good?
Yes.
Depends. There were 5 young men who were a part of a Christian evangelistic group called, I believe, New Tribes Missions, back in the 60s, who wanted to evangelize a group of indigenous people in Ecuador, one of whom was Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot and his 4 buddies went down to the Guarani tribe in Ecuador and attempted and did evangelize them along with their Jim Elliot and his family. So I'm not going to tell you the story. I'm just going to tell you this. There's a movie made about it called The End of the Spear. It's a movie worth seeing. There's a documentary you can go on, look at YouTube. Look for the same thing documentary. I think it's better than the movie. But they're both really good. Point is, the Guarani tribe valued spears. They used spears to protect themselves from the beasts in the jungle in southern Ecuador. They used them to hunt with. It was valuable to keep their spears sharp, have a nice, well-balanced spear. That's part of their culture. How many of you have a nice, well-balanced spear in your garage? Nobody. Okay, Helene does. So that's really a non-moral issue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's good because you hunt with it, you protect yourself with the spear. If you were thrust into the Guarani indigenous tribe, it would be important for you to have a spear. It's not important here. So in that culture, it's important. In our culture, it's not important. But one of the things the Guarani would do with their spears was when their wives would get sick or die in childbirth or they needed a wife, they would go to neighboring tribes with their spears and they would spear the men and steal the wives. Now, if you were in the Guarani tribe and you were a Christian, if you were Jim Elliot or one of his children that went down to live with the Guaranis, would you take your spear and go spear the neighboring tribe to steal their wives? That's where you would have to break with culture. That's where culture would become evil. Sometimes culture is neither good nor bad, but sometimes it's bad because it's based on values. And in that value, they would be ignoring the value of life, the value of a man having the right to have his own wife, the value of possessions, and at least in that culture, the value of not stealing, the value of not harming life. They would be breaking God's values. So when it says, do not be conformed to this world, this is a little tricky because Paul somewhere else said, 1 Corinthians, I believe 2 Corinthians 9, I become all things to all men. I become everybody to everybody's culture so that I can gain some people. You know, to the wise, I'll become wise. To the Guarani, I'll become a Guarani. I'll dress like them. I'll live like them. Whatever. I'll get a spear, whatever. I become all things to all people so that I might gain people. But in this context, don't be conformed to culture, a period of time when that culture is trying to force you into the mold, and it's not a good thing they're forcing you into because it violates a principle of God. And so that's what he's talking about here. I've chosen just a couple of things of our culture. You could choose 100, but I've chosen a couple, especially a couple of things that affect our children. I'm going to fly through this one. My button doesn't go fast enough. Here we go. One of the things that our culture, boy, this is really cutting edge stuff. And most of us are a little bit older. than this generation here. And so we don't see this as impacting as it is. But social media and social identity is huge in our culture. Is social media good or bad? Yes. I got a social media message this morning from a brother over in Temecula who would like advice and to talk about how to do ministry together. And I said, here's my phone number. He sent me something on Facebook in Messenger, which is a social media platform. I responded privately in Messenger, here's my phone number. What's yours? Let's talk on the phone. That was good. Social media was good. Sometimes when I can't find somebody's phone number, I just look them up on Facebook and send them a messenger message, and they get back to me, and we talk on the phone. That's good. That's a good use of that platform. Our children, folks, teenagers, preteens, you guys in junior high school and even younger primary grades, you guys know you use social media all the time. Your school even gives you a Chromebook probably to take home and use that for homework. And it has the possibility, although the district wouldn't want you to use it for social media, it has the possibility of probably doing that. Posting is everything to this generation. Social media. Electronic communication is becoming the most important thing in the lives of young people. How many people know what FOMO means? Raise your hand if you know what that means. Now the young people aren't, a couple already are, but some of you need to raise your hands because I know that you younger folks know what that means, but that means it's an acronym for fear of missing out. Kids will post that, use that acronym and a bunch of other acronyms, or they'll say, are you AFK? How many of you know what that means? Raise your hand. Are you away from your keyboard? A lot of us don't know what that means because social media isn't that important to us, but I guarantee you everybody under 25 knows what that is. Everybody under 20 knows what that is, and there's a whole bunch more that they come across my little exposure, and I Google them, and anybody know what Google means? I look them up on the internet and find out what that is. Babies using social media. 73% of young people 18 to 34 would rather text with you than talk with you. How many of you have figured that out? You called your grandkids and they won't answer the phone? But they will text you anytime, day and night. They love texting. That is just the culture. They take their phones into the restroom. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands on this, but 66% take their phones into the restroom. 70% sleep with their phones at arm's reach. 62% would rather forget their wallet than forget their phone. How much dependency do I left mine over there. If I was under 20, I wouldn't have done that. How many of us, phones are the most important thing to the generation, to the kids they're coming up through junior high and high school. That's extremely important. Cell phones are like digital heroin. Recent brain imaging research confirms that glowing screens affect the brain's frontal cortex in exactly the same way that drugs like cocaine and heroin do. To prove this, they did a series of experiments with a video game called Snow World, which served as an effective painkiller for burn victims in a military combat unit who normally would be given large doses of morphine, but because of its addictive properties, they didn't want to give so much morphine. So they had these burn patients play Snow World, in which the player would throw snowballs at cartoon penguins. And they found that when the guys and gals were doing that, who had burns causing great pain, the activity of doing that diminished the pain, and they felt no pain while they were playing the game. It's like digital heroin. About 50% of babies, you saw the picture of the baby before, about 50% of babies between 6 and 11 months use a touch screen every day, with the rate increasing to about 92% by the time they're 3 years old. our little newborn, one of the things that our son and daughter-in-law were given was this thing that he could be rocked to sleep in, which had a little projector in it and little digital things that he could manipulate even before he was a year old. The more times toddlers spend using touchscreen devices, the more likely they are to have sleep problems. The Restart Life Center near Seattle treats kids as young as 13 years old for addiction to mobile devices. Our kids are hooked from infancy on mobile devices. And here's an interesting statistic about the culture of the younger generation today. If there's a crisis, if there is an auto accident, if someone's beating somebody up, if someone's breaking into a house, or someone's shocked, or house is on fire, young people today, the first thing they will do is what? Take pictures and post it on social media. Calling 911 is like number 5 or 6 down the list. It's not the first, second, or third thing. The first, second, third thing they do, they post it on this site, that site, tell their friends. It's about making the video. It's about getting following on social media. This is just the culture in which we live. Experts say that 60% of parents underestimate how depressed, worried, and children are that spend time on social media. 94% of parents underestimate how much fighting and vicious bullying goes on in the social media world. Teenagers today get as little exercise as 60-year-olds. When I was 10 years old, 11 years old, 12, 13, 14, what did you do when you were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14? Outside, ride your bike, play basketball, play with your friends, play hide and seek, climb trees. What do kids do today? Kids do today are so addicted to social media, most of them get about the same amount of exercise